The sheer volume of stories that we consume on a daily basis, the brain never had to contend with before. Thousands of stories coming at us. Stories in a tiny tweet, in an Instagrammable moment, in a Facebook update, and then we have those stories that condenses the complex French bread-making process into a 30-second clip. And what about those stories that take us deep into the rabbit hole we call episodes and seasons, where we follow complex characters as they take us on all kinds of unimaginable twists and turns? We want our stories in snackable sizes, and then we want the right to binge on our stories for 12 hours straight, anywhere, anytime. We are fat. We are fat with story, and the entertainment, media, and advertising agencies are screaming, "We want stories, more stories." Philip Pullman, the author, has said that after nourishment, shelter, and companionship, stories are what the world needs most. It's a basic human need. We tell stories to ourselves and to one another as a way to create meaning out of the randomness of our lives. You see, the brain processes 400 billion bits of information per second. 400 billion per second. And it can't contain it. So therefore, it is a clever way of organizing that information. And the brain's favorite way of organizing is by chunking. It puts information together. And how does it do that best? Through stories. Because stories have a beginning, middle, and end. Without stories, all this information is just data. It's the story that makes it memorable and a long-term memory in that brain. As much as technology is pulling us in fragmented directions, it's also bringing us together. This is why companies like Facebook, LinkedIn, Pinterest are winning the race here. They are perfecting the art of bringing connective points together. And once we're there happily connecting, they're studying why we connect, what we connect with, making predictions about the future, and hopefully trying to persuade us. There was this great trial lawyer in the US, Mo Levin, and he was fighting this case for a client that had lost both his arms in an accident. It was a long and complicated trial, and it was time for the closing arguments. And as closing arguments go, attorneys usually just present the facts of the case back to the jury so that they remember it and then make an emotional appeal. When it came time, Levin walked up to the jury box and he took an awkwardly long pause, as if he had forgotten the argument. After pulling himself together, he said, "You know, you just had a lunch break. And I saw you, members of the jury, go to your room to have your lunch. And I saw the opposing lawyer take his client out. And I saw the judge and the clerk go out. And so I said to my client, 'Hey, Harold, let's go for lunch together.' And we crossed the street and went to this tiny restaurant. And then he paused again, and he looked every juror in the eye, and he said, 'Ladies and gentlemen, I went for lunch with my client. He has no arms. He eats like a dog.'" Levin reportedly won one of the biggest settlements in the history of New York State. He knew that story can go where quantitative analysis is denied admission. Our hearts. Data can persuade us, but story can fire the imagination and stir the soul. My father was a journalist and a great storyteller. He passed away several months after 9/11, and I was living in New York City at that time. I was a professor of script writing and storytelling principles. He was 65 years old, but Alzheimer's had already been taking him away from us several years prior. I couldn't go back for his funeral because the lawyers had advised me that if I left, they couldn't guarantee that I would be able to come back in because Malaysia was on a watch list. So I was teaching storytelling principles during the day, and at night, my own story was becoming unglued. I didn't know where I was in this new globalized, radicalized digital world. I kept making mind maps of myself, putting myself in the middle and branching out 10 mind maps, 20 mind maps, and 4 years later, and perhaps 10,000 mind maps later, I became unglued, unemployed, and I was living on my friend's couch. This version of fragmentation was something I recognized. Because you see, my father, 6 years before he passed away, was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And now I stood at the doorfront of my own fragmentation, and I was determined not to go through that door. And so what did I do? I surrounded myself with books. I read everything I could possibly get my hands on: neuroscience, on cognitive psychology, on chaos theory, on disruptive theory, anything that indicated how nature organized itself in a fragmented world. And I finally, after reading all of that, got the answer, and it was always in front of me. It was stories. We, as human beings, are hardwired to seek cohesive stories. At the end of my very dark journey, I had come out with a blueprint of the meaning and the role of fragmentation and disruption and the power of cohesive stories. This is the new world, a world pulled apart and pulled together again by the stories we tell.